Okay? Persistence. Resilience. Okay? Power. What sort of power?
Personal power, like that sort of power where you're not having power over others, but having power to be able to do things.
Power over yourself.
Yeah.
Okay? That's nice. You guys have jumped ahead to what I planned to talk about. So, what I planned, and you guys will completely get this straight away, is showing you a few pictures and asking you which side is stronger, left or right. Ready? So the first one, a bodybuilder on the left, or Magnus Carlsen, a chess player on the right. Who's stronger? Right. And we say left?
They're both strong in their own ways.
They're both strong in their own ways. Okay. A person who has everything that they could ask for, or a person who has nothing but has their family. Right? Anybody say left? No. But as you guys have said, it all depends on what the strength means, right? When we look at the word strength, in the Cambridge Dictionary, and I'll come from Cambridge University, so I have to go with the Cambridge Dictionary, not the Oxford Dictionary. The degree to which something is strong or powerful is what defines strength. That's what strength means, according to the dictionary. But like we said, like we saw, strength means different things based on the situation you're in, based on the concept that you're talking about, and so many different things. And yet in the world today, we measure success, we measure strength based on what we see other people doing, don't we? A classic that some people may have already seen before or be familiar with. This concept that we're testing or measuring everybody by their ability to climb a tree. And yet, what would happen if you're measuring a fish by its ability to climb a tree? As Einstein says, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. So many times we have this concept and thought that they're successful, they're CEOs, they're big business people, they have a Tesla, they have a 4-bed apartment. Why don't I have it? They're successful, I'm not. And therefore we spend our life striving for such things. But isn't that just like a fish mentality where maybe our strength is somewhere else? Maybe what we're meant to be doing is something different. But we're measuring our success, our strength, based on the strength and success that we're seeing everybody else go through. And that's why there's something called spiritual strength, which is a universal strength that all of us actually need, want, and should be striving for. Because at the end of the day, the way I'm defining spiritual strength is the ability or the degree to which someone is strong or powerful amidst the dualities of life's events. It's the ability to handle the ups and the lows of life. Not just the lows, not just the sad rainy days, but also how do you handle the elations, the celebrations of getting a first in your degree? How do you handle having your first job? The happiness that comes from it. Because we're always so focused that, okay, I need resilience. Oftentimes when we think of resilience, we're thinking the negatives of life. You need to be able to survive all the bad things that happen. But when we look at resilience in its core, sorry, I'm just going When we look at resilience at its core, it's not just about the negatives of life, it's about the dualities of life. The ups and the downs, the happiness and the distress. How many of you were here last week with this talk with Keshav Swami? Okay, quite a few. Some eager hands going up, huh?
It was very good kirtan, the best of my life.
Best kirtan of your life. That's nice. So one thing he was talking about last week is about a book, a text called the Bhagavad Gita, which I'm sure we have in the room somewhere. Are people familiar with the book called Bhagavad Gita? Yeah. Anybody not familiar? Okay, a few. So the Bhagavad Gita is an ancient wisdom text that really talks about, oftentimes people assume or think that it's a religious book. But what we find is that it has so many profound truths, so many, this is one edition of the Bhagavad Gita. Highly recommend Bhagavad Gita as it is for anybody who hasn't seen it before. But it goes through so many truths, so many aspects of our life that help us connect with ourselves and understand the world for what it is, and then understand how to deal with the world and beyond the world. And last week he was talking about how the Bhagavad Gita is so profound that not only is the content spectacular, but so is the construct of the Bhagavad Gita, the way the conversation, the way the narration actually takes place. But I'm going to focus on a part of the content. This is two verses that come up in the Bhagavad Gita, which really describe what spiritual strength is at the core. One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. In the material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. This idea that we can be firmly fixed in perfect knowledge, this idea that we can be perfectly situated and content and happy with ourselves and with what's going on around us, if we learn the art of handling the dualities of life. And a succinct word that may come to those who are a bit of a linguist is equipoised. This idea of being equipoised with what is happening in life. And the Bhagavad Gita basically helps us understand that the best way for one to be equipoised in life is to have a higher purpose, a higher consciousness, by which all the surface things that are going on, they don't affect us. Then we deal with them, but from a higher platform, from a higher plane of consciousness, from a higher plane of thinking, so that all we're doing is dealing with a matter-of-fact item and not getting absorbed in what's happening. Oftentimes you see people who go through extreme emotions. Somebody's passed away. People who experience grief, loss. But you find some people who live in the emotion instead of going through the emotion. And what happens if we live in the emotion? We start to become absorbed in what's happening. We start to become absorbed in the negative of life. But if we learn to go through the emotion, you experience that sadness, you experience the sorrow, the distress, but you also are walking closer towards the light on the other side of the tunnel. For those who may be familiar, anybody know what this is? Yin Yang. Does anybody know what Yin Yang means or what it's representing? Feminine, masculine. Right. So it's the opposites, as you mentioned, the opposite, the dualities, the male, the female, the strong, the weak, the summer, the winter, the heat, the cold. And you can see that, okay, this picture may not be the best representative of it, but you see these dots in the middle, this one and this one. It's basically representing that even within the dualities, there's a small element of the opposite within it. So even in the happiness that we experience, there's a small element, at least a small element of suffering within it already. And even within the suffering, there's a small element of happiness within it. It all depends on the perception you have. And what we see is that when you go through the Chinese philosophy to understand the yin yang, the whole concept of yin yang is to understand that in order to be at peace, in order to be happy, in order to have strength, spiritual strength, we need to learn the art of balancing ourselves through all of those facets of life. And when we turn to the Bhagavad Gita again, the Bhagavad Gita gives an analogy of a lotus leaf. How we need to become like a lotus leaf who is untouched by the water. What is special about a lotus leaf is that every leaf grows, every leaf blossoms. But a lotus leaf is so special that if you were to dip it in water and bring it out, the water runs straight off. it doesn't get affected by the water. But where does the lotus leaf grow? In murky water. Murky water. Not just normal water, but murky water. A lotus leaf has all opportunity or ability to be affected by the murky water. You pick the lotus leaf up and it's got all the mud or the dirt around it, it's got water contamination. But somehow, wherever you pick up the lotus leaf, however you pick it up, if you just turn it upside down, everything will wash off. Everything will go away. And so the Bhagavad Gita, in this section, in that part of the Bhagavad Gita, it helps us to try and understand and explains that if we want to handle life situations, we need to learn to become like a lotus leaf. While we're living inside the murky water, inside the happiness, the distress, the cold situations, the hot situations of the world, but just like the lotus leaf, doesn't really care so much about it because it knows it's got its own substance and enhances and takes advantage of that ability it has. We also need to do the same thing. And to help us with that, there are 3 layers of identity that the Bhagavad Gita helps us understand and explain. The first is the gross body, the physical body, right? You can see my physical body, my arms, my legs, the skin, etc. Then the second layer is the subtle, the mind and the intelligence. And the third is the soul, the spirit self, the identity that we really have, the core of our essence. When we look at situations in life, do they affect the gross body, the subtle body, the soul, or a mixture? Which ones? All of them. Any other takers? Mostly subtle body? Gross and subtle. Yeah. So actually, gross and subtle is basically what all the life's events really affect. Because it's described that actually the soul, if you really pulled back, if you really developed spiritual strength, if you really connected to your spiritual self, then you'd come closer and closer to realizing your identity as the soul. Identity in relationship to God, divinity, and to everyone else, such that you're not affected by so much by what's happening on the gross and the subtle plane. When you look at the gross plane, maybe you got a knife cut, maybe you entered an accident. When you look at the subtle body, the mind, your boss has been shouting at you for so long. It's like annoying, isn't it? But what about the intelligence? How do material situations affect our intelligence?
They do.
How?
Depression.
Depression, okay. Any other?
It's what we take in.
It's what we take in.
It's what we take in.
Nice, I like that. So this idea that material situations can affect our intelligence by either contaminating our consciousness or by uplifting our consciousness. And that same thing can either boost our spiritual strength or it could bring it down. It can make us weaker. And we know what these are.
4T. The T model.
Right. How loud are they?
Really loud.
Really loud. Do you think they're louder than Kirtan that we were playing? I don't know if you hear when we were playing Kirtan.
Yeah. How are they?
Probably, right? This is the picture of our life, actually. Things are so noisy in our mind, in our intelligence, in our heart. Things are going on all left, right, and center, all around us. But imagine if you just look carefully at the picture. Imagine if you're looking at the situation, but then you see reality for what it really is. Just a tiny little toy car. Looking as if it's a massive car on the road. Think how small all the noise will become. And that's the art of spiritual strength, actually. In life, we're always so absorbed in the dualities of the immediate situation. Gotta go to work, gotta get up, gotta get that promotion, gotta tell that person off, gotta make sure that Christina realizes how wrong she is. Gotta make sure my boyfriend knows that he's hurt my heart. But spiritual strength is about transcending it through higher engagements. By transcending it because we're stepping back from the situation, because we're no longer dealing with the situation by being in the picture. We're dealing with the situation by stepping back and looking at the picture. All of you will be familiar to this scene, the busy streets of New York. A couple of days ago, I was actually going on a morning walk around the block at like 5 a.m. or something like that. I don't know why, don't ask me why, I just decided to do that. And it was so peaceful. It was like barely any cars on the road. But then by the end of the walk, like 6 a.m., that's it, jam-packed, gridlock traffic. But imagine you just took a plane and you're now flying many thousands of feet above the city. All the hustle and bustle, all the cars, gridlock traffic, all the people, the busy streets, now look like tiny matchsticks. Replace that hustle and bustle with life situations. And imagine if we enter the plane and look at it from above, from a higher plane of consciousness. So that was the precursor to spiritual strength, this idea on why elevating our consciousness, looking at life situations from a higher plane, builds our spiritual strength. Because at the end of the day, spiritual strength is all about being able to look at the situation, not being somebody who's looking from within the situation. And what I want to do and focus on, and I want to try and make it discursive if we can, I don't know if time allows, but is the ABCDE for spiritual strength. Some people may be aware of the acronym already, but it's 5 principles that you see most spiritual practitioners will try to adopt in their life in order to elevate the consciousness so that they're looking at the matchsticks of the situations in the world instead of looking from within the situation, from within the busy city and looking up at the skyscrapers and seeing how big everything is. So, what is the ABCDE?
Always be centered, doing everything.
Okay, I like that, but okay, that's a good one. Let's see. Let's have 2 more. Any other guesses?
I didn't hear the first one.
Always be centered, doing everything.
Always be centered doing or during everything?
Doing everything.
Doing everything, okay.
The ability to zoom out.
The ability to zoom out, okay. Doesn't quite fit ABCDE, but yeah, okay. Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. A is about association, the people you hang out with. Have you ever felt like there's certain people in your life that you feel, yes, I really feel inspired by them, I really feel uplifted by them. And then there's some people that's like, if I hang around with this person, they're just really down low in the ditch and they're pulling me down. So talk about more about that. Books, we're talking about consciousness, how it's basically what we're putting into our mind. Isn't what we read, what we listen to, what we see on the TV, all the same thing? Whatever we're putting inside ourselves, whatever we're allowing our consciousness to be affected by, is what's going to affect us in the long run as well. Chanting, spiritual sound vibrations. All of us started here, or most of us started with kirtan. And we talk about the power of sound briefly as well. Diet, you are what you eat. The heavy meals in the restaurant, whatever it is, afterwards you're like, I'm so full, I can't even step outside the restaurant. But then you eat something healthy, something light, something nourishing. and then you feel like you're ready. You're ready for many more hours of doing work. And the last one, E, is for engagement. Becoming a spiritual Samaritan. Samaritan generally we refer to as doing charitable activities. But the art of spiritual strength is doing spiritually charitable activities. So we'll go through each of them, and maybe after I finish talking about each letter, if people have comments or questions, then feel free, and we'll try and be mindful of time. So association. There's a common saying nowadays, I can't remember who says it, maybe it is Jim Rohn, but this idea that if you tell me who your 5 closest friends are, then I can tell you what sort of person you are. I can tell you your characteristics, your personality traits, maybe your occupation or something. Why? Because the idea is that the people, we're all naturally inclined towards like-minded people. People who have the same sort of thought patterns, same sort of natures. So the chances are that if you told me who your 5 closest people were, I'll be able to somehow weed out what sort of things you're into, what sort of likes you have, dislikes you have, what sort of consciousness you have. If we're always hanging around people who are complaining, who are saying bad things about people, pulling people down, laughing at people, chances are we're also going to be absorbed in the same things. But if then on the other side, we're associating with people who are always glorifying other people. Even if they do something wrong, they're thinking, oh, but they did this nice thing. They're trying their best. Then maybe we'll also adopt that sort of mentality. And so when we look at spiritual association, it's all about the upliftment. This is a picture, if you're familiar with the temple, then this is one of the rooms inside this very building. Hadai Pran, as you can see over there, I don't know where he is now, but yeah. This idea that when we come in spiritual circles, we're with like-minded people, people who want to nourish their spiritual self, people who want to uplift themselves, and their focus is on raising the consciousness instead of being absorbed by the distress of the world, by the politics of what's going on, by the anger that everybody is having around us. And so if we want to develop strong spiritual strength, we have to find people and associate with people who are sincere and serious about growing in their spiritual life, about rising above the situations. And all of you are so fortunate that you're in that sort of association in this room. You could have decided to stay at home and watch Netflix. You could have decided to go to the cinema. You could have decided to go to the restaurant. But each and every one of us in this room decided to come here, maybe for the kirtan, maybe for the free food, the prasadam afterwards. But you're all sitting here also listening because you recognize the value of trying to uplift your consciousness, finding some peace, some serenity in your spiritual self. So that's a plug and an encouragement to keep coming. Yeah, especially if it's your first time. Books. We read so many things every day. There was a stat that I found. This might scare people. How many hours do you think people spend on social media each day? 7? Oh wow, 12 hours. That's pretty. 3/4 of their life. So the average time scrolling on social media is 2.5 hours. Scrolling. Not reading the posts, scrolling. Think about that. Oftentimes we say, oh, I'm too busy, I don't have time to do this, I don't have time to read books, I don't have time to go here, I don't have time for anything or anyone in my life, I don't have time for my husband or my wife. I'm not saying they do that, by the way. I'm just joking because I know their husband and wife. And yet people spend 2.5 hours on average scrolling on social media. That's scary. And when you're scrolling, you're going through post after post. Imagine how many posts you've gone through. Like, I don't know how long each scroll takes. Say it takes like half a second, 1 second to scroll. You've 2.5 hours times 60. I can't do the maths right now, but that's a lot of posts that you've just contaminated your mind with. And what we find is that personalities who are really spiritual, who really want upliftment of consciousness, not just for themselves, but for other people, bring out spiritual books, wisdom texts that can help us associate with knowledge that can give us spiritual strength. Books like the Bhagavad Gita, books like, there's other books even like Science of Self-Realization or Chant and Be Happy, so many books. And just to kind of talk about this personality that I've got on screen, Srila Prabhupada. He was such a spiritual personality that he spent his night's sleep to write spiritual books so that people like us who are living and constantly in the situations of life, unable to find a way out, can find something that we can use those 2.5 hours of scrolling to do. Something better. Even if we spent half of that time, or even a quarter of that time, or even a fifth of that time scrolling, reading something that would actually uplift our consciousness. Imagine how much better our consciousness would be. Imagine how much better our life situation would be. He would sleep about 2-3 hours each night because, I could bring out his whole schedule, but from morning to night, he'd meet people, he'd speak to people, he'd travel the world, or he'd write books, compile books. I know what's so incredible about him. How many of us are between 20 and 30? How many of us are between 30 and 40? 40 and 50? 50 and 60? 60 and 70? 70 and 80? How many of us would travel 6 months on a cargo ship? Cargo ship. Would you do it when you're 69? You would?
On a mission? Absolutely.
On a mission? He was on a mission to save the world with spiritual knowledge. And he did that at 69.
6 weeks.
Was it 6 weeks? 6 months? 6 weeks.
I think you have to actually be that age
To realize.
to realize.
Yeah. When the bones go stiff, when the muscles start giving way, when it becomes hard to even stand up, let alone walk on a rocky ship, difficult. He had nothing to gain, but he did it because he recognized the value of spiritual strength.
It's everything to gain. That is everything to gain.
That's everything taken. Sorry?
Everything to gain.
Oh,
That
everything
is
to gain.
everything.
Yeah, that's true. By giving, he gained everything. Yeah, I like that. So yeah, I guess this is a plea again. Let's instead of spending 2.5 hours scrolling on social media, let's turn social media off for at least half an hour and turn to the books, spiritual wisdom. And of course, I'm talking about Srila Prabhupada here, but you may find there's spiritual wisdom that you have access to. Why not associate with it? Because spiritual wisdom has 3 facets actually. Every spiritual wisdom text should have 3 facets. One is that it helps us understand the real vision of how to see the world. It tells us the reality as it is. Oftentimes people try to avoid being pessimistic, and so they end up trying to find a way to be optimistic, but then they forget to be realistic. There is happiness, but then there's also suffering that comes with the happiness in the world. But people oftentimes just want to see, be merry, like stop worrying about anything. But there are reasons to worry. There are reasons to think about the negatives of life, just as there's reasons to think about the positives of life. The second thing is that it should be able to give you a vision of a reality that is beyond the world. Something to look forward to, because if we're not staying in the world and looking at the world, if our mood is to elevate ourselves, to be in the plane so that we're seeing the matchsticks of life around us, then there has to be something that the plane is giving us, right? And the third thing is that these spiritual wisdom should give us a sense of identity that we can actually feel we have hope to make our reality. It's all good to see the world for what it is. It's all good to see this nice fantasy of the skies, but is the wisdom text actually helping us see that we may be down here in the busy streets of New York? There may be a plane up there that is looking over the busy streets, but can I actually go from this situation and live in that plane, or stay in that plane, or board that plane? And I'll briefly just talk about this. A lot of what Srila Prabhupada's books talk about is a vision of a spiritual world where you see here two personalities, Radha and Krishna, where they're waiting at the entrance, at the portal, to invite us to come and board that plane, to live in that spiritual consciousness. So then C, chanting. Now many of you are familiar with the mantra already because of the kirtans. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So what is this chant? What is this mantra meditation, as many of you may be familiar with? Before talking about mantra meditation, let's talk about the value of sound. The first sense that people are born with is hearing. The last sense that goes when somebody dies is hearing. So the first thing that we associate with in the world is hearing, and the last thing that goes is also hearing. By nature, sound is so integral to our existence. And so what we put into our consciousness, what we put into our ears, becomes very, very important. If we're hearing negative things, if we're hearing mundane things, if we're hearing political situations, if we're hearing complaints, if we're hearing all these things, think about how much that contaminates our consciousness, because it's going inside the ears, which are so valuable for us. But then imagine we're hearing about uplifting things. Imagine if we're hearing about spiritual knowledge. It gives us a direction and it lifts us up. And experimentally, see here, water crystal experiment. Has anybody seen this before? Yeah? So I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly how the experiment was conducted, but as a general thing, there were certain sound vibrations that were put over water, and then the scientists or researchers tried to freeze the water as soon as the sound vibration was going through. And then this is what crystallized, no pun intended. Thank you, such a beautiful pattern. So many beautiful patterns here. But when you go to, for example, you fall, or you make me sick, or evil, polluted water, look how disgusting, or how you may find it amazing, but for me, it's like, that is not beautiful at all. And yet, positive sound vibrations have an impact on water. And then there's a controversial one, but a social experiment. It wasn't done by scientists, it was done as a social experiment. You may be aware of this because it's been in the news quite a while. The IKEA plant social experiment. So what they did was they had two plants. This one is the bullied plant, and the other one is the praised plant. So they had two plants in a room, and they'd invite anybody and everybody to come and speak to the plants. One condition, you bully this plant, and you praise that plant.
That's planned abuse.
And what did they find? They found that the one that was bullied depleted very quickly. But the one that was praised, that was given encouragement, flourished. It's a social experiment, so it's not a scientific basis to say that scientifically proven that plants get bullied. But it goes to show. We see in life also, children, even adults, they thrive when they feel encouraged. It's not to say that they shouldn't be corrected. It's not to say that people shouldn't be told when they're doing something wrong. But it's this idea that the energy that you're bringing into your relationships, the energy that you're bringing into sound, like what you're saying to people, has an impact. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can't hurt me.
That's not
Right?
right. That's not
Right.
foundation. Water.
Exactly.
Water.
Exactly. We have that saying with this mentality that, oh, you know, it doesn't matter what people say, but actually it does matter. And yet, children are taught that, at least when I was a child, I was taught that from a very young age. But then that leads to abuse. That leads to so many things. There's an art of resilience to learn, but it's not negation of the abuse. Bringing it back to sound vibration, we can see how powerful sound vibration is. And things that are spiritually uplifting have their own vibrations, frequency that they work on. Something like, if I just go back. This is often termed as the Maha Mantra in the Vedic tradition. Maha Mantra literally means the greatest mantra, the greatest sound vibrations. And the idea is that this stems from a spiritual place, from the highest spiritual place, and therefore all the other sound vibrations that are positive and uplifting are automatically available from this sound vibration. And so just by associating with the kirtan, some of you may be familiar with personal meditative practices, chanting the mantra by yourself. You know, for 5-10 minutes, just eyes closed or whatever you do, sitting down and just chanting the mantra to yourself. It brings so much spiritual energy into the environment. And you may feel it when you came into the temple, you may feel different already. Like something's different about the place because it's been hijacked by the potency of sound vibration and the energy that it brings. So that's chanting. D for diet. I thought I'll keep the pictures of the food right there instead of like making it animated and come up because everybody loves food. Green Giants. I don't know if this is a thing in America. Was the Green Giants advert like big thing? Like you are what you eat? Is that a thing in America? Why?
Our body is literally like made of food. Like we are an accumulation of food.
Yeah. We're putting things inside our body, and they can either nourish us or they could make us groggy. So what does diet have to do with spiritual life? Because we have to eat. Go ahead.
And our body is a temple.
Mm.
Like all our spiritual practices are done within our body.
Yeah, we have to take care of our body. So not only should we be mindful of what we are hearing or taking in or reading, but we should be mindful of what we're putting inside our body in the form of food. Things which are nourishing, things which are nutritious. But also, another aspect of spiritual strength is eating food which is spiritualized. And in the Vedic tradition, in the temple's tradition, what we often do is offer what we eat, before we eat it, to the divine energies, to God, such that it spiritualizes the food. Because the idea is that we have so many contaminations. We have so many things that are impure within us. even whilst we're making the food, even when we got the food from the supermarket, before we even got it from the supermarket, so many things could have happened. Whilst maybe if it's vegetarian food, then insects were killed and pesticides, etc. Whilst it's coming from the farm to the supermarket, who knows how many living entities got crushed by the trucks that are driving. And then when we're cooking also, everything that we're killing, the bacteria, etc. But the idea is that divinity is pure. That's ultimately what divinity is meant to be. Divinity is pure. So by offering what we have to divinity, to God, we're asking God's blessings so that he recognizes that, yes, there's so many contaminations, so many impurities that exist in the food, but you have the ability to purify it because you're all pure. What happens when a pure object comes in contact with an impure object? Well, the pure object isn't going to become contaminated because it's pure. That's its nature. That's its position, to be pure. And so what we like to do in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, Patram pushpam palam toyam yome bhaktya prachati tadaham bhakti upahritam ashnami pratatmana. It says that there's 4 types of things that we can offer to Krishna, to God, to divinity. Whoops. One is a leaf, a flower, a fruit, and some water. That's not all we offer, by the way. That's the bare minimum that we can offer. Because wherever you are in the world, you can find some fruit or some leaves. You can find some water. You can find some flowers. You can find something. At least one or two of these items we can find, even in the Saharan desert. And the idea is that we can offer it to Krishna, but the special art of offering, which is given in that verse, is to do it with love and devotion. Because as spiritual practitioners, our spiritual strength isn't just about what we're doing. It's about the mood, the intent, and the consciousness in which we're doing it as well. If we're giving to Krishna, if I'm giving somebody, if I'm giving Chaitananda or Surabhi Kunj or something, I'm like, here's the Bhagavad Gita. Like, she might take it. But it's like, okay, like, thank you very much. I don't really want it now. But I'm like, Surabhi Kunj, here's a Bhagavad Gita for you. Then she'll feel the love, the affection that's coming. And in the same way, if we're offering it to divinity, if we're offering it to Krishna, to God, then the mood in which we're giving it also makes a big difference. And I won't really dwell on this, but it's described also that it should be in the way Krishna desires. So I guess generally speaking, if I generalize it, we can talk more about it later, but this idea of being vegetarian, because we talk about we are what we eat. When animals get slaughtered, they go through there's such a blood rush going through them that all of their emotions basically become part of the food, and that contaminates our consciousness also. And so that's why when we look at diets of spiritualists, not just in the Hare Krishna tradition, but many spiritual organizations, spiritual paths, they were all oriented towards a vegetarian diet. So then the last one, engage. This idea of doing spiritual Samaritan activities. Spiritual strength, like you mentioned earlier. So what's your name? Xavier. Okay, that's interesting. Xavier. Oh, nice. Okay, so as you were mentioning, Srila Prabhupada basically, I was saying that Srila Prabhupada had nothing to gain from just coming and giving selflessly. But then Xavier was saying that actually he had everything to gain. How? How can you give everything away? How can you give your whole life to other people but gain everything in return? Because with spiritual strength, as we develop spiritual strength, we find that when we give ourselves selflessly to people and to other things, to help them in their journey to spiritual life, to help them in their journey to connect with themselves, you find that it's nourishing for yourself. You find that you've somehow grown in your own connection to God, to divine energy within you as well. And so like this, you can see here, again, I think I took this from you, right? Again, this is a picture of, actually you can tell us when.
The kitchen.
In the kitchen, but which program?
It was the Be a Monk retreat, the
Okay.
first one, I think.
So there was a Be a Monk retreat not too long ago, I think, or a couple of years back, where we had people come over, stay for a week or a couple of days or whatever, experience 24 hours of a spiritual life, and engage in some activities that help them connect selflessly by giving themselves. So plug for Be a Monk Challenge if anybody's interested right here. So those are A, B, C, D, E, our spiritual life. When we engage in these 5 things, it nourishes our spiritual life, it nourishes our spiritual strength, because then we're raising our consciousness to start thinking and being absorbed in things from a higher plane of consciousness instead of from being within the situation. So to recap, A was for association. What does it really give? It gives us spiritual interactions. You can live outside in the material world, you can go everywhere around us, and everybody's talking about someone or something. There's a saying, right? Small minds discuss people, average minds discuss events, but strong minds discuss wisdom. Quoted by, I don't know the person, but it's a quote. So if we want to build our mind, if we want to build our spiritual strength, then we associate with people who are interested in the same thing, who are uplifting our consciousness so that we can interact in spiritual ways. What was B? Books. And the benefit is that it gives us a spiritual vision. It helps us see the world for the reality it is. It helps us get a vision of an eternal reality from the higher realm of consciousness. And it also gives us a path to go from here to there in our own consciousness. C was for? Chanting. And the benefit of chanting is spiritual absorption. Because when we're inviting all that spiritual energy through sound vibration into our mind, I mean, if you passed a live event, a live show, even if you didn't like the song that was playing, what's going to happen half an hour later? It's still going to be playing in your head, right? Like, I don't want it in my head, but it's just playing non-stop. But when you're consciously chanting, when you're consciously associating with and intentionally associating with sound vibrations, how much more will that actually benefit us when it's lingering in the head afterwards? Diet, spiritual nourishment. Eat healthy food, because healthy food nourishes the body, but then eat spiritually healthy food, because that also nourishes us spiritually. And then E is engage, which is spiritual activity, so that not only are we with people that help us build spiritual strength, not only are we reading or watching things that help us build spiritual strength, not only are we hearing things that help us build spiritual strength, not only are we eating things that help us spiritual strength, but also we're doing things that help us build spiritual strength. And very quickly, that is just the side effect. Being able to, if we build our spiritual strength and being able to navigate life situations through the higher consciousness is actually just a side effect of building spiritual strength. Because imagine you're in that plane. You know, in the initial parts, I'm assuming most people have been in a plane, right? And if you're one of those excited people, like maybe it was your first time you went into a plane, you try to go, can I sit by the window seat so you can see like what's happening? What happens? You're on the ground, it's like nothing's fun, you know, you're just watching the little, whatever it's called, the plane path. But then as soon as you lift off, you're like, oh, I can see like everything's looking smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. But there comes a point where it's like everything's so small you don't care about it anymore. Because then you start looking for something higher. You start looking for the stars, for the things that are above the plane. Things that you can't see from the ground. And so, spiritual strength, yes, the first part is most of us are absorbed in the dualities of life. And then when we want to develop spiritual strength, we recognize the importance of transcending it through raising our consciousness by being engaged in the ABCDE of spiritual life. But then there comes a point where we become absorbed in that transcendental consciousness. In the world, we go on a plane and we know, I knew my flight from London to New York was 8 hours long. So I knew I was in the sky for 7 hours, because it takes like half an hour. And I knew I had to come back down. But imagine if I could be on a flight that stayed up in the stars, or not in the stars, but in the clouds, for my entire existence. Everything would always be a matchstick. Or at that height, it'd be like a even smaller than an ant, right? And when you develop such spiritual strength, what ends up happening is that you're so absorbed in the transcendental reality, you're so absorbed in living in that plane, that even when you're dealing with the things that are on the earth, the busy streets of New York, you're like, I'm gonna dip down to deal with it, and I'm right back up there. But what ends up happening with us, we're living down here, we dip up on the Tuesday night program, and then we go back into the everyday life and live with great difficulty. So, a few takeaways, and I promise I'll end. So the first thing I want to say is, let's be consistent. Spiritual strength is not, like I mentioned, it's not just we dip in on a Tuesday night and then, by the end of the Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, back to work again, and everything's upside down again. If we're consistent in our spiritual practices, if we're consistent in the ABCDE of life, of spiritual life, we'll find that as we grow, as we mature, spiritual strength becomes a norm that we are associating with, as opposed to the Tuesday night 1 hour high. Srila Prabhupada would often quote that with spiritual strength, you can be high forever. Second thing is be committed. Modern research says it takes 21 days to build a habit. That's just a habit. But if you want to absorb yourself in a higher reality, if you want to absorb yourself and be different or think different, as the Apple saying goes, then can you really just let it be a habit of life as opposed to make it the main job of your life? Oftentimes, all of us say, I have a 9-to-5 job, and then I'm a spiritualist in the evening or on the weekend. But to the extent that we're saying spiritual life is our 9-to-5, and I'm a solution architect, part-time job, to that extent, I'll be able to be absorbed in my spiritual strength. And the third thing is be engaged. We do so many things for ourselves, for our family, for our children, for society. But when are we going to do things for our actual spiritual nourishment? And so I will end there and say final words that you have an amazing program here with the Tuesday night programs. And I know there's so many other things that Bhakti School do on the weekends as well. And you have an opportunity to engage in the ABCDE of spiritual life, because actually that's where we get the spiritual strength. And you guys probably, especially those who have come to previous programs, you all have probably experienced this, where you've come to the program, you've experienced the nourishment, you've experienced the elevation of your consciousness. But then the next day, you're back in the world and the busy streets of New York. So keep coming and keep nourishing yourselves. Alenda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, so I think it's questions, comments, chastisements. Yes.
When you talk about like being detached, like seeing things, like from the airplane, seeing the traffic down there, it's stoic. If one has been practicing being stoic, it's kind of seems like the same thing. So what's the difference really? Is a person who practices being stoic more prepared to be Krishna conscious?
So apologies for the ignorance, but stoic meaning like drugs and things? Or is that?
No.
Stoicism,
Stoicism.
philosophy of
Yeah, I don't-
stoicism.
I'm not good with those.
Just being able to just push through doesn't
Oh,
matter.
I see. Okay.
Stoic.
Right.
Doesn't matter what happens. I'm just.
It's an interesting point. Is this ability to just push through no matter what? I guess we may somewhat generalize by saying some resilience through situations, but in a very heavy, hard way. Is that conducive to our spiritual life, to being able to have that higher consciousness? But what we see is that, at least in my experience, because I feel like I come from that sort of background actually, I feel like it makes me hard-hearted. And so if we're the type of person that thinks that, okay, just pressing through, being military about everything, being able to just, okay, so many things are going wrong. I'm having 100 kg put on my head. It's okay, I'm just gonna run to the finish line. If I have that mentality, then what's gonna end up happening is I'm gonna expect other people to have that same mentality. I'm gonna end up having this feeling that the body, the gross body and the subtle body don't matter. And all that matters is my goal. But the reality of spiritual life is that it's not about the goal. It's about the journey as well. And so you could say it helps, but then are you really going to feel spiritual when everybody around you is feeling, actually, I don't feel this person is spiritual because they're just hard-hearted? I don't know if that helps, but
Kind of seeing that difference a little bit.
yes.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about the slides with the snowflakes and the plants, and wondering what would happen if a different language were being spoken, which led me to the thought that, I guess, questioning whether it is the words being spoken or if it's the energy and intention behind those words. Also with food affecting your consciousness based on who's preparing it or how you prepare it and the consciousness you prepare it with. So is it the words or the intention and energy, and if so, why does the Maha Mantra specifically matter so much?
Really nice question. So how is the energy associated to all these things? So in the bottom right, you may not be able to read it properly, but it says polluted water after prayer. There was actually an experiment done with some of the Vedic mantras, but I couldn't find the picture for it with the crystals. But you're right, it's not necessarily the words itself, it's the frequency that vibrates off the back of the entire thing with the intent, with all these the energies that come with it. Like I was giving the example, here's a Bhagavad Gita, take it. Versus, sorry, would you like this Bhagavad Gita? You know, the love, the affection, the devotion that was talking about in the diet aspect. So you're right, the words aren't so, they're important to some degree, but they aren't the main frequency that's vibrating. It's the heart. It's the heart that's vibrating, the frequency. And then we talk about, sorry, the second one was about the Mahamantra specifically, right? I think I missed something in the middle.
It's all connected too.
Okay. So with the Mahamantra, the reason why it's described as the Mahamantra is because it encompasses so much spiritual potency within it, and maybe some of the seniors would like to share more about it. But as a vibration, even, what is this? I forget which practice this is, but this is not quite Brahma. Okay, anyway, I forget which yogic practice this is, but they did an I don't know if it's an experiment or some research on the vibrations in the way the chant happens as well with the Mahamantra. And just by the lip movements, just by the tongue movements, just by the movements of the vocal cord, invokes so many of the yogic practices that helps build so much stability, so much energy, and all these different facets that we all look to, like Hatha Yoga, etc. for. So even from that angle, it gives us so much. But then when we look at it from a spiritual perspective, the reason why it's so powerful is because these are directly names of God given in the Vedic literature. In quite a few different literatures, this mantra specifically is given and described, and it helps associate us to spiritual energy directly. It's described that the names of God and God are non-different. I don't know if there's anybody called Jacob in the room. Please put your hand up if there is. But anyway, Jacob's quite a common name in England. Or like John or whatever, you know? Oh, you're John? Okay, let's use John then, right? If I looked this way and was calling John, then he might look at me, but he might be oblivious to it because it's like, okay, maybe somebody else is called John. But when we talk about God and God's names, it's described that God is present in the name itself. And so we're associating with the all pure through the mantra itself. And that's why the frequency that it vibrates is so powerful, because we're associating with a pure vibration. It's not a mundane vibration like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or I don't know what else there is these days, but Monster. Oh yeah, Monster's it big in US, right? Okay, maybe one more? One more? Okay, yes.
I think it's just to follow up on that, because we're all taught that the primordial sound of the universe is Om. The fundamental vibration of the universe is Om. So we chant Om repeatedly, right? You connect with the consciousness out there. Do you agree?
That's very nice. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that of all sounds he is Om. So why emphasize the Mahamantra versus the Om? There's various different angles we can take, but I think since we're kind of like a group of people who want to be personal with each other, I'll talk about the personal aspect. When we look at the phrase Om, you're right. It is the primary sound vibration that we often hear about, especially from Vedic literature. But when you break down where Om comes from, how Om manifests, we see it's a very impersonal aspect of divinity. But when you look at the Mahamantra, which I just bring it up. Okay.
It's right up there.
Oh yeah. Okay, so it's right there. When you look at the Mahamantra, it's made up of only 3 words: Hare, Krishna, and Rama. And all 3 aspects of these associates to a personal aspect of God. Hare is the personal divine energy aspect of God. Krishna and Rama are directly associating to God, to Krishna. And so, yes, Om, you could chant Om. I mean, there's rules and regulations that the Vedic literature give regarding the chanting of Om. But it's impersonal because when we're chanting Om, we're chanting the word Om. But when we're chanting the mantra, our focus, our meditation, which actually nicely leads into Kirtan, is that we want to reach out to the personal God. We want to reach out to the person God and call out to him like, my life is full of so much of the hustle and bustle of New York, but I want your help with your purity to make it like a tiny matchstick. so that I can stay in the pure consciousness with you. And that's why the Mahamantra is described as the personal mantra for God as well. Okay, so I'll end there. Hadai Pran Prabhu, would you like
Thank you
to?
so much. Let's give a big round of applause.